Hello, welcome back to Learn Anatomical Vessel. Today we'll be looking at the second part on the study of the pectoral muscle. In part 1, we looked at the pectoralis major and pectoralis minor muscles, which are part of the pectoral muscles. In this part, we'll be looking at the remaining pectoral muscles, which include the subclavius and the serratus anterior. Now, for the subclavius originates from the junction of the first rib and the costal cartilage. It originates from the junction of the first rib and the costal cartilage, and it is inserted at the inferior surface of the medial third of the clavicle. It is inserted at the inferior surface of the medial third of the clavicle. In our previous video, I showed you 4 things that can be seen at the inferior surface of the medial third of the clavicle, and I give you a simple mnemonic that can help you remember those 4 things. And the mnemonic was 2CNS, and we'll say the first C will help us to remember the costoclavicular ligament. The next C will help us to remember the clavipectoral fascia. N will help us to remember the nutrient foramen. Then the last S will have to help us remember the subclavius. So subclavius muscle. Now with the mnemonic CNS, 2CNS, we can remember the contents or things we can see at the inferior surface of the medial third of the clavicle. Now for the innervation, the nerve innervation to the subclavius is called the nerve to the subclavius, and for action of this muscle stabilizes the sternocostal joint. It anchors and depresses the clavicle, and it also protects the subclavian vessel. It stabilizes the sternocostal joint, it anchors or depresses the clavicle, and it also protects the subclavian vessel. Now with this mnemonic, SAD clavicle, we can remember the function of the subclavius. SAD clavicle, the first function is stabilizes the sternocostal joint. The next is anchors the clavicle, and the next is depresses the clavicle. So the S in SAD help us to remember that it stabilizes the sternocostal joint. A in SAD help us to remember that it anchors the clavicle, and the D help us to remember that it depresses the clavicle. So with SAD clavicle, you can remember the functions of the subclavius muscle. The next muscle we'll be looking at is the serratus anterior. The serratus anterior originates from the upper 8 ribs. It originates from the upper 8 ribs, and it is inserted at the costal surface of the medial border of the scapula. It is inserted at the costal surface of the medial border of the clavicle of the scapula. The medial border starts from the superior angle to the inferior angle. So it is inserted at the costal surface of the medial border of the clavicle. Now the upper fiber of this muscle is inserted at the superior angle. The upper fibers of these muscles is inserted at the superior angle. The middle fibers of this muscle is inserted at the medial border. The middle fibers of this muscle is inserted at the medial border, while the lower fibers of this muscle is inserted at the inferior angle. So upper fibers are inserted at the superior angle, middle fibers are inserted at the middle fibers are inserted at the medial border, while the lower fibers are inserted at the inferior angle. Remember, the medial border starts from the superior angle and ends at the inferior angle. This muscle is innervated by the long thoracic nerve. The muscle is innervated by the long thoracic nerve. Now, the action of this muscle is protraction of the scapula. It is the main muscle that does this action. Remember, in our previous video, I also told you that the pectoralis minor protracts the scapula, but the protractor minor only assists the serratus anterior to protract the scapula. The main muscle that does protraction of scapula is the serratus anterior, and another function it does is that it lateral rotation of the scapula during overhead adduction. Lateral rotation of the scapula during overhead adduction. And with this mnemonic, say please, you can remember the function of the serratus anterior. Now, the first two letters of C will help us to remember serratus anterior. The first two letters of C helps us remember serratus anterior, while the first two letters of please helps us to remember the function. The first two letters of please helps us remember the function, which are protraction and lateral rotation of the scapula. So with say please, you can remember the functions of the serratus anterior. And here is a summary table showing us the muscles of the pectoral region and the action or function. Now for pectoralis major, we use major film to remember the function, where we say the major help us remember pectoralis major, F help us remember flexion of the arm, A help us remember adduction of the arm, while M help us remember medial rotation of the arm. For pectoralis minor, we use the mnemonic minor spine to remember the action or function of this muscle. The minor help us remember pectoralis minor. The X help us remember that it stabilizes the scapula. The P help us to remember that it's undergo protraction. It helps the serratus anterior for protraction of the scapula. The I help us remember inspiration, which is force inspiration. Why the N help us to remember that it pulls the scapula inferiorly, because the second letter of inferior has the second letter of inferior has N. So N help us to remember that it pulls the scapula inferiorly and anteriorly because it is located at the anterior pectoral region. Now for the subclavius, we said we can use sad clavicle to remember the function, where we said X is that it stabilizes the sternocostal joint. A is that it anchors the clavicle, and D is that it depresses the clavicle. Remember I said any muscle that is attached at the inferior surface of a bone have the ability to depress that bone. Any muscle attached at the inferior surface of a bone have the ability to depress that bone. Now for serratus anterior, we use the mnemonic say please, where we say the first two letters of say will help us remember the serratus anterior, while the first two letters of please will help us to remember that it's undergo protraction of the scapula and also lateral rotation. And I say that serratus anterior is the major muscle that helps in protraction of the scapula, while the pectoralis minor just assists the serratus anterior in protraction of the scapula. With this, we have come to the end of our section on pectoralis of the pectoral muscles. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you for watching.